Joining us on the program right now, Howard Nimerov from Pajamas Media. Howard, good evening to you, sir.
Hey, good evening, Cam. How are you?
I'm excellent, man. Glad you could join us on the program tonight. And so, with everything going on with the United Nations and the no-fly zone and Libya and now the Ivory Coast, I find it fascinating that as you've been researching the United Nations and their quest for a global gun control, you've discovered that in order for them to make their ideological case, they have to ignore their own data?
Yeah, that's true. They do. The United Nations has been collecting international data on both suicide and homicide, and then the Small Arms Survey in Switzerland, which is a non-governmental organization that works very closely with the United Nations, as well as other global gun ban groups like Rebecca Peters IANSA. They're all in line with their data. However, they are not using their data. The fact is that if they use their data, they would be saying, "Gee, we should promote gun rights."
Okay, you say if they were using their data, they'd say, all right, we should be in favor. Now, you looked at the homicide rate for, 145 different countries.
Right.
Comparing it to the gun ownership rates in those same countries.
Correct.
Did you find, Howard, any statistical correlation between the two? Does owning, in other words, countries with a higher rate of gun ownership, do they also have a higher homicide rate?
Well, according to the UN, yes, but according to their data, no. Actually, homicide rates decrease slightly as gun ownership increases.
Oh, really? Now, Howard, how can they are they ignoring their data? Are they misinterpreting their data? What exactly are they doing with these numbers?
That's a good question. I have to wonder that myself. But when I look at the average corruption index for all 192 member countries in the United Nations, that corruption index number is just under 4, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being squeaky clean and 1 being completely corrupt, your average United Nations country is far more corrupt than not.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of somebody who's benefiting from gun control in order to run his corrupt game over the citizenry of a country, I would say we're not going to see them promoting liberty anytime soon.
No. So, in other words, among these countries with lower homicide rates than the United States, that's not every one of those countries is going to be classified as an oppressive regime. But is it fair to say that that's where you'll find the oppressive regimes?
Yes. The lower the gun ownership rate, the more corrupt the government, the less political and civil rights the citizenry has, if you can call them citizens. And as gun ownership goes down, economic freedom goes down. So, in other words, more wealth and power is being focused on the elite few, who, of course, also have all the guns.
Yeah. And as you point out, state-sanctioned violence, state-sanctioned homicides, like what we've seen in the Middle East over the past couple of weeks, those aren't reported. I mean, that's not an actual homicide if a government henchman kills you, right?
That's true. The United Nations Department of Drugs and Crime has collected this homicide data from law enforcement sources in the countries. So if the Syrian security forces decide that the 20 civilians they killed during one protest is not murder, then those 20 murders are not included in their homicide rate. The same with Yemen. And, of course, then you have government-sponsored genocide like China, which between 1949 and 1987, where the military and police legally murdered nearly 77 million people. All those murders are not included in the homicide rates. So, in fact, since we have a fairly non-corrupt government and our homicide rates that are being reported are fairly accurate, our homicide rate is actually lower than what's being reported here. But even so, out of that 140, 150 or so countries, we're tied for 50th highest homicide rate.
Really? That's amazing, Howard, because every time I read one of the anti-gun screeds, it's always the U.S. has the highest homicide rate, not only in the world but in the solar system. I mean, they really want to make the United States out to be this sort of Mad Maxian post-apocalyptic society where everybody is just going around assaulting everyone else.
Yeah, that's about the sum and substance of it. But the fact is that comparatively speaking, America is fairly nonviolent.
Well, there you go. Now, I'm guessing, Howard, that one of the reasons why the United Nations is ignoring its own data, and I realize they haven't talked to you about this, so you don't know their motive entirely, but we do know this, and you quote the United Nations report that said self-defense is a widely recognized yet legally prescribed exception to the universal duty to respect the life of others. Self-defense is sometimes designated as a quote-unquote right. There is inadequate legal support for such an interpretation. Self-defense is more properly characterized as a means of protecting the right to life and, as such, a basis of avoiding responsibility for violating the rights of another. Now, that's the ideology at play, that there is no right of self-defense.
And if you kill an attacker, you violate.
You've harmed them. That's right. You've harmed their human rights.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, I mean, this is the bizarro world that the UN operates in. They've actually put forth the position that if you don't have really restrictive gun control laws, like Chicago, or Washington D.C.'s old gun control laws, or New York City's gun control laws, if you don't have those types of gun control laws in place, then you're actually violating the human rights of your citizens.
You could be dragged before the World Court as a human rights violator. However, the Chinese government, which has now been, The Guardian has just reported that there has been an increase in what they call disappearances, as well as increased jailing of protesters. Now, that's not a human rights violation that China is going to have to face up to anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Howard, again, it's fantastic work. I was really interested, especially the correlation between government corruption and gun ownership. I thought that was fascinating. I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight, sir, and look forward to doing this again very soon.
Well, thanks for the invite. It's been great. Thanks, Cam.
My pleasure. Howard Nemeroff joining us here on Cam and Company.